Yes, it is me again, but honestly, how could I not make a video about the second episode of Pretty Pretty Please I Don't Want to Be a Magical Girl animatic when the first one I made about it is to this day my most popular video. In a way, I feel connected to this series now, especially when the creator herself wrote a comment under it that gave me a better insight on how it is to work on such a project, which honestly, I felt honored as such a small person on the internet to have my video noticed. So, if you have not watched my original video about the Magical Girl show created by the skilled Kiana May, you may not know my opinion about the concept at all. So in quick summary, I believed back then that it is a pretty simple concept for a parody of magical girl type of anime that lacks a bit in humor department but nevertheless is quite an impressive work, considering Kiana does most of the work on her own. I have been following her work all this time and was aware that she keeps on creating content around it, mostly on TikTok in the form of short comics and illustrations. What I was not aware of is that she intends to keep on going with the animatic as well, as during the time of uploading the pilot episode there was no certainty whether or not the project will be continued in such form. Nevertheless, I got quite excited. Why, you may ask? If I haven't been as excited about the first episode, would I still want to watch the second episode? Of course, because I kept Kiana's comment in my mind. I accepted the fact that the first episode was made so everyone could understand it, as not the entire audience can be familiar with the trope of magical girls. But I also remembered that she wrote that the story would have less setup and surface level references and be more of an earnest take on a magical girl story with its own rules if she were to make more. She made more! So now I want to see her unique approach to the base concept. I want to see a simple parody concept turning into its own individual story. The potential has been there from the beginning, so let's see if the new episode brings us something unique this time. So we actually start where the episode 1 left us off. Episode 2 doesn't waste time re-explaining the premise, and honestly, that alone already makes it feel more confident. It feels like Kiana is much more comfortable playing around this time, especially when it comes to facial expressions. There's a noticeable jump in how exaggerated and playful they are, and it gives the animatic a lot more personality. You can really tell she's having more fun with it, and that energy carries through the episode. Episode 2 also gives us a clearer look at the villains this time, and importantly there is a distinction between the main antagonist and the more unserious side villain. The main villain is the female character, and she's the one who actually feels like she's carrying narrative weight. Even though we don't get a lot of direct information about her yet, she's clearly the one dropping hints, especially when it comes to the idea of lost memories or a past that isn't fully intact. There's something deliberately restrained about how she's portrayed, and it gives off the impression that she knows more than she's letting on. She's still fairly reserved at this point, but she feels like a setup for something more complex later down the line. In contrast, the male villain feels intentionally unserious. He immediately reminded me of characters like Jack Spicer, or the type of comedic antagonist you would see in Acro Trip, dramatic, loud, and more entertaining than threatening. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. He works well as a side villain meant to inject energy and humor into scenes rather than move the story forward in any meaningful way. Right now, the side villain is doing his job, but as antagonists go, he's very flat. I have no doubts that he will carry his own story of how he became a bad guy and why in the first place, but for now the interesting part is clearly the main villain, and while episode 2 doesn't give us much yet, it at least establishes that she's not just there to be evil for the sake of it. The groundwork is being laid. It's just a matter of whether the story follows through on it. There are also a lot of small background details I really appreciated, like the poster in the library. Stuff like that doesn't move the plot forward, but I appreciate the message they send. That being said, not all of the humor landed on me. Some jokes, like the limping gag, start to feel repetitive pretty quickly. And this is kind of my main issue with the comedy in general. The jokes are very simple, which isn't a bad thing on its own, but they come one after another, so none of them really get the chance to hit. It sometimes feels like the episode is trying a bit too hard to be funny instead of letting moments breathe. Honestly, the only time I actually chuckled was the damn scene, unfortunately. When it comes to character dynamics, I actually really like the duo of Zira and Aika. Their interactions feel natural, their roles are clearly defined, and the contrast between them works in a way that feels intentional rather than forced. There's a good rhythm there, and when the episode focuses on the two of them together, it's honestly some of the strongest character work in the animatic so far. My issue is with the duo. is with Hoshi as an individual character. I understand the idea behind them, the grumpy, grounded presence meant to balance out the more energetic cast. But instead of feeling like a stabilizing force, Hoshi often comes across as someone who just complains about everything. That constant negativity doesn't really add tension to the humor for me. It's mostly just drains the energy out of scenes they're in. Even though Hoshi gets a bit of redemption by the end of the episode, it still wasn't enough for me to fully change my impression of them. As for now, I personally don't find them very likable, and that makes their presence harder to enjoy. Not because the concept doesn't work, but because the execution leans too heavily into frustration rather than contrast. On the other hand, something I've been appreciating more and more is Aika's personality shift when she's in her Star Guardian form. It works really well. The contrast between her usual goofy high energy self and this suddenly composed, cool, almost intimidating version of her is genuinely high. It actually reminds me a lot of Tsuneyoshi Sada from Katekyo Hitman Reborn. Normally awkward and silly, but turning into an absolute badass when it matters. That kind of transformation is very Magical Girl, and it's one of the strongest elements of the episode for me. I did have some mixed feelings about Zira as well. Her self-doubt shows up very early in the story, and while I understand that it fits her personality, it felt a bit rushed. Especially because when you really think about it, she didn't actually make things worse. Quite the opposite. Even if no one was fully aware of it, she did protect Aika. So the narrative pushing that guilt so soon didn't entirely work for me. Overall, episode 2 feels less like a standalone episode and more like a continuation of the introduction, but a more engaging one. It's still hard to fully judge the concept at this point. 13 minutes isn't a lot for a viewer, but it is an insane amount of work for an animator, especially for an indie project largely driven by one person. So even though I wasn't completely impressed by everything I saw, I'm still genuinely happy this series exists and continues. And honestly, the news that the first episode will be fully animated with the help of Mercury Filmworks is huge. This is the same studio that worked on Rapunzel's Tangled Adventure, Hilda, and so many other amazing shows. Seeing an indie project like this get industry support is always exciting. Not just for this series, but for other creators too. It's a proof that original ideas can find a place, and hopefully it motivates more people to give their own concepts a shot. So yeah, while Pretty Please I Don't Want to Be a Magical Girl episode 2 isn't perfect, it feels like a step forward. The potential that was there from the beginning is still very much alive. And now it's slowly starting to take shape.